Well, rewind to the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic and a nasty byproduct that came out of it: anti-Asian discrimination and outright hate. This sentiment caused artist Victoria Day to develop what could be described as a complex relationship with mirrors, simultaneously avoiding them, but also checking them consistently. Day brings that relationship into her exhibit Two Ways, which is on display right now at the Martha Street studio in The Exchange. And Day joins us from her home in Toronto this morning. Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Thanks so much for taking the time. First of all, I want to maybe not to harp on it for too long, but maybe to go back to that moment where you're just considering your relationship with mirrors. And was there what was that moment in your relationship with mirrors that you went, I need to share about this through my artistic practice?
Well, I think that anytime I start a body of work or start conceptualizing a show, I really latch onto one aspect of my relationship to my cultural identity. And for this show, I really wanted to bring other people into this relationship because I know that it's not just me.
Mm.
Like anyone who has experienced like body dysphoria of any kind, whether it's cultural or not, has this sort of love hate when it comes to mirrors where you're constantly checking. I feel like people have it a lot with photos of themselves, with constantly staring at that tiny little box in like Zoom meetings, that
Mm.
shows them where they are just compulsively checking their appearance, but it might not be healthy for them or they might not like what they're seeing. And it's like a vicious circle of making them want to check more. Um, so I just wanted to bring people into that in a subtle way that
Mm.
just meant that they were also very aware of their body while visiting the show.
So that subtlety is demonstrated in the fact that there are not a bunch of mirrors hanging from the ceilings and the walls at Martha Street Studio, but rather these screen printed works. And we'll get into more of the aesthetic qualities of that in just a second. But for now, how did you set about conveying the idea of mirrors through these works that are on display in Two Ways?
I guess it's layered in a few different ways. All of my work is based on a very traditional art practice called doncheong, which is the patterns that you find painted on the roofs of palaces and temples. And it's a practice that has been protected and used for literally over 1,000 years, which is kind of wild to think about as a Canadian settler. So all of those patterns are geometric and they mirror themselves, is one layer. And then there are some pieces in the show that don't utilize actual physical mirrors, but they themselves are a mirror composition and they're installed in a way where they reflect each other. And then there are actual mirrors in the show, but they are installed across from works, I suppose, where you're able to either engage with one of the prints through the face of it that is outwardly facing you, or you can see it through the mirror and get a little bit of a different perspective of it.
Right. Yes. I neglected to mention the mirrors reflecting the actual images, but it's not as though they see an audience member coming to see Two Days or Two Ways, 2 days would be able to see themselves reflected in that way. But that said, this is something of an exploration for an audience to, as you say, be invited into that space of reflecting on themselves. How does dancheong, this very traditional sort of Korean style of creation, how does that invite a viewer into that sort of reflection?
Um, I think I think anyone who is visiting the show in a very thoughtful way might notice like that all of the patterns are very consistent, that there's an obvious there is an obvious logic around all of the patterns and all of the pieces, not just one. And it might occur to them that it could be based on something. And then there is, I do mention doncheong in the statement for the show. So my hope is always that people will look into it and reflect on the longevity of the practice, and also just appreciate the beauty of it and the labor that goes into it. And that in itself is a reflection of, positive East Asian culture, and positive, Korean celebration, for people to engage with, that's very specific and something that they may not have appreciated before.
A new way of inviting an audience into a reflection here, perhaps. You mentioned that this is an invitation for the audience to reflect on themselves as much as it is a way for you to reflect on your own relationship with yourself and your identity. Is it cathartic for you to have these works on display now, or is it more vulnerable to be able to reflect yourself in this way? Or is it some mixture of the two?
I think it's both. I do always say that the process of making is extremely cathartic for me. I work on everything by hand. I don't do anything digitally. I don't take advantage of a lot of the digital methods in printmaking that can make it easier. Instead, I'm very locked in and rooted in my analog ways. So everything that I make takes a lot of time, and that time itself is a part of the medium where it allows me to reflect on the ideas that I'm working on, and ideally prepares me for the very vulnerable moment of showing the work where I do have to discuss it. And sometimes there are a lot of themes and a lot of specifics that I just don't really go into when speaking publicly because they're still very much unprocessed for me. So it is a mixture where making the work is extremely cathartic and showing the work is occasionally uncomfortable. But I think that the value of visual art is that it allows you to communicate things that you might be uncomfortable communicating in other ways. And so it really is a way for me to find connection without having to explicitly go through explaining all of these things to everyone.
Right. You mentioned before also this cycle of reflection, and I think a lot of people listening to this will very much appreciate that image, and we all go through this. I think when we see, you mentioned we look at a picture of ourselves and we kind of go around, oh, is that really the way that I look? Is that really the way the world sees me? And then you maybe come around to some sort of point of acceptance, but then around and around it goes. When you think about the audience and what they might take away from Two Ways, is the hope that they maybe break out of that sort of cycle, or is it more creating a place of, yeah, this cycle exists, but we're here together, and regardless of the reflection, we all sort of feel this way?
I think that ideally people will go in and some people are completely comfortable with it, right? Some people, it's totally fine. They don't even really think about the fact that there's mirrors there. It's like a cool art thing, and they might catch their reflection, but it doesn't affect them in any way. And then there are people where they'll go in and be like, oh, wow, okay, I really was just trying to look at this, but that's me staring back, and it might cause them a little bit of discomfort, but that is something to then think about. And then my hope is that because you're viewing a different but similar side of the work through the mirrors, people will come to a realization that both sides have value, whether you're seeing them in the reflection or not, whether you're seeing them through a barrier or not. Both of them are valid in their own way, and taking that lesson and applying it to other parts of their life where your specific perspective or your specific feelings towards something are not the only feelings that you might have and the only perspective that you might have on that thing. And it's good to give value to all of the range that you're experiencing.
So a range within a person, but also a range within the different people who come to see it. It was really striking to hear you talk about the person who might not think about their own reflection as they walk through the exhibit, but also the person who goes, wow, okay, I need to take a second and process this. For that person who maybe is just kind of walking through without that sort of reflection in the midst of reflections, I suppose, that maybe comes back to what we were talking about before with this, the genesis of this project being reflecting on anti-Asian discrimination and outright hate that you've confronted. Is there also room or intention behind two ways to help people reflect on the privileges they have, on whether they need to confront their own reflections in the same way?
I mean, I think that I would never try to put that much on a viewer, especially since it's been so uh, challenging for me. But if
Mm.
that gets taken away, then absolutely, it's a being in Canada, the relationship that you have to your heritage, especially if you're a visible minority, is something that is like very complicated and very personal.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I don't know that I would want to be the catalyst for someone jumping into that, but I will say that for anyone who has already started consciously addressing where how they relate to their identity, I hope that it shows them that there's other people who are doing the same thing.
Hmm. A very fascinating reflection or series of reflections collected in two ways, which is on display at the Martha Street Studio until October the 10th. We'll have more information at our website this morning, classic107.com, and the Classic 107 app. Victoria Day, this was really interesting to dive into your works this morning, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us and tell us more.
Thank you.